Hello everyone, thanks for joining us tonight. Welcome back to Climate Conversations for the fall semester. Today we are here to talk to Joan Meiners, who will be talking about the housing shortage and climate change. The Climate Conversation series is hosted by Arizona Humanities. We are the state affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities. Arizona Humanities supports humanities-based public programs with cultural, educational, and nonprofit organizations across the state. Now, this program is made possible by funding from the National Endowment for the Humanities. And just to go over a little bit of housekeeping today, we'll have Joan on in just a second, and after her presentation, we'll do a live Q&A with the audience. So for those of you viewing at home, you can drop your questions into the chat, which is to the left of the screen, or you can use a Google form, which is linked in the description below, and I'll also drop the link in the chat in just a second. But we do invite you to ask any questions you have, and we'll get to them at the end of the presentation. And now I would like to introduce our speaker for today. Joan Meiners is a climate news and storytelling reporter at the Arizona Republic and AZ Central. She previously worked as an environment reporter in St. George, Utah for the Spectrum News and in New Orleans as part of ProPublica's 2019 Local Reporting Network. Her work has received multiple national awards, including the 2020 Nina Mason Pulliam Award for Outstanding Environmental Reporting and the 2020 Kevin Carmody Award for Outstanding Investigative Reporting, as well as the National Association for Science Writers 2020 Science and Society Award and 2021 Feature Story Award from the Society of Environmental Journalists. Before becoming a journalist, she completed a PhD in ecology, studying the ecology of native bees. We are so excited to have Joan Meiners on today to talk about the housing shortage and climate change. So without further ado, please welcome Joan.
Thank you. All right, thank you for being here. So as Julianne said, I'm the climate reporter at the Arizona Republic. It's a new position as of early 2022, so I'm excited about their commitment to that increased coverage. We did have an environmental reporting team, but now we have more focused coverage on the climate. And that has mostly, in my time since joining the newspaper, been in the form of weekly Wednesday stories where I try to break down what climate science and impacts are and how they affect Arizonans. So just to kind of orient you a little bit, some of those stories include reporting the science behind recent news related to the climate, doing narrative stories about how climate change is affecting rivers, commentary on climate kind of news culture, book reviews, and accountability stories where I follow kind of what the legislature is doing related to climate. So if you're interested, feel free to check out that material on our website. But today, I'm going to mostly be talking about a project that I've started working on as part of a fellowship through MIT's Environmental Solutions Initiative. So this is a program that gives local journalists kind of some extra funding and technical support to pursue projects that we might not otherwise have the bandwidth to do. And I just wanted to throw up these other, so this year there are 5 fellows, so I just wanted to kind of tease your interest in the projects by the other fellows that are definitely worth checking out, and you can find that on the ESI website. So getting this funding and having this position at the Arizona Republic allowed me to think more deeply about this, which is kind of the scene that you always see out a window of an airplane flying in and out of Phoenix Sky Harbor times 1,000. This is the way that we are building in Arizona. And as I think about climate impacts and kind of what we can be doing better and how we're setting certain things in stone in terms of the future that we're building in Arizona, this just kept popping back up into my mind. You all know that Arizona is growing very quickly. We have about 1 million new residents since 2010, a 13% increase. That's quite fast. In 2022, Maricopa County gained more residents than any other U.S. county. And accordingly, it's also 5th among metro regions in terms of building. We have 172,000 new housing units added between 2010 and 2020, according to census data, but there's still a dire housing shortage. So latest estimates from Arizona Department of Housing indicate a need for 270,000 from Arizona Department of Housing indicate a need for 270,000 additional units statewide, and a City of Phoenix analysis called for 163,000 additional units. You can see this shortage everywhere. When you travel around, especially the Phoenix metro area, we have a huge homelessness situation. There's a lot of people that are obviously not housed, and they're experiencing record-breaking heat. We had record rates of eviction, 7,000 eviction filings just in the month of July, which, as you all know, was the hottest month ever recorded in any US city. So to be homeless in this environment is a very serious thing. This is Kathy Shows. She's 63. She has been homeless in the Phoenix metro area for about 5 years, and I met her one evening in late July when I was wandering around the zone looking for people to talk to. It's an area west of downtown near the shelter services where a lot of unhoused people have set up camp. And she tried to get a bed in a shelter, but even their overflow beds were full. And so she and her boyfriend, Fernando, were sleeping on the sidewalk. And I sat there and talked with them for about 2 hours, and it was 99 degrees when I was sitting there talking with them. She has trouble sleeping in the heat. It's really hard to have your body recover after you've been outside that all day, and then you don't have anywhere to cool off during the night. And this is the situation for about 10,000 people experiencing homelessness in Maricopa County as of a January 2023 count. So that's despite the fact that Phoenix actually is addressing homelessness more than many other cities. Were nearly 600 shelter beds added in 2022 and 800 more planned for 23 and 24, but you can see that those numbers don't really match up. So there's still a very extreme need. And at the same time, we have temperatures rising. So this is a graph on the left of temperature increases over time at Phoenix Sky Harbor. On the top, maximum, in the middle, average, and the minimum temperature, that's the overnight low. So it's a little subtle to see, but since 1950, all of those are going up, especially the minimum overnight temperature. So in July, we set a new temperature record for highest overnight low, which was 97 degrees. So one night it failed to drop below 97 degrees that night. That's pretty extreme. And it's not distributed evenly across the metro area or the state. So there are certain pockets of the valley that are hotter than others. And this is a map made by maricopa.gov on the top right here that show the number of heat-associated deaths in different parts of the city in 2022. And the darkest regions, the orange one, I think there were 18 deaths, and I think in the darker red it was 21. I had the numbers on there, but I deleted them because it's kind of cluttered. That's right where the zone is, right where a lot of the homeless people are living, and it's like just concrete everywhere you look. There's hardly any green space. And then the bottom here is the graph of heat-associated deaths and how they've increased over time. And this is actually outdated. It's 2021's graph. 2022, there were 425, and then we're on track to exceed all of that. So that is just going up and up and up. All of these problems are compounding each other. Part of that is due to the urban heat island effect. So that is the phenomenon of when you pave over natural desert impervious surfaces with concrete or asphalt or buildings, those surfaces retain heat from the sun, release it more slowly overnight, and so you don't get that cooling down of temperatures overnight. And so that is contributing largely to the reduction and drop in overnight lows. And a recent analysis by the organization Climate Central found that certain areas of Phoenix are now on average 8 degrees hotter due solely to urban development. So that's a comparison between undeveloped desert and the way things are now. And that's true for areas of Tucson and other regions as well. So the urban heat island effect is having a noticeable difference. I think you'd notice 8 degrees difference. And we've built so much over the last 50 years in Phoenix. One of the first stories I wrote when I joined the Republic actually was in response to a reader who emailed me and said, all my friends are denying climate change, saying that the increase in temperature is really just due to the urban heat island effect. Can you help me explain to them how climate change is involved? And so I contacted a researcher at the Urban Climate Research Center at ASU, and he has done some modeling on this and found that it's about half and half. So about half of the temperature increase that we've seen in the past 50 years is because of the urban heat island effect in those highly urbanized areas. The other half is due to climate change. And so building, home construction contributes to both of these. Obviously, it contributes to urban heat island effect by paving things over. It also contributes to emissions that are driving climate change. So the production and transportation of materials, building materials, results in emissions and environmental impact, of course. And then when you build new buildings, those buildings use more energy. And so you're putting a greater demand on the energy grid. And as of right now, Arizona still does not have a ton of renewable energy sources, so most of that new energy demand that we're placing on the valley by building more buildings is directly resulting in more fossil fuels being burned. So about 6% of the electricity produced in the US just goes to power air conditioners. So there's also this feedback cycle of you build more, you warm more, you need more air conditioning, you run the air conditioning, it makes everything hotter and uses more energy. So we're stuck in this cycle. This is, if you go to the story that I published in August, this is a cool, there's a slider thing made by one of our producers, Shelby Slade, that shows the different, you can move this bar back and forth, that shows how the valley has changed from aerial imagery between 1984 and 2022. She also made a time lapse that is cool if you want to go check that out at the story. But you can see how much we've paved. I mean, there used to be more agriculture in the valley on the left. That greenery would cool down, keep temperatures low. We've paved over so much of that with streets, and another study found that 10% of Phoenix surface area is actually parking. So we've paved over so much of the valley, and that is making everything much hotter. This is a somewhat dramatic front page of the Arizona Republic. That was my story in May, covering a study done, including some ASU researchers were authors on that found that a widespread blackout during a 5-day heat wave in Phoenix would send 800,000 people to the emergency room and 13,000 people to the morgue. And that's not only horrifying because those numbers are huge, but it's horrifying because Phoenix currently only has about 3,000 emergency room beds. So just to be clear, this scenario is not like super likely, but because the consequences are so high, I think it's valuable work to think about what would we do in this situation. It's not impossible that this would happen, and we are getting closer to it. There were several smaller blackouts in different parts of the valley during July, which was basically one long heat wave. Okay, so basically all of that so far was background. And now I'm going to tell you about what I did with my project. So this is a lovely illustration created by Shelby that shows kind of the differences in what's going on in building across the state. So in the center we have kind of Phoenix, which is just abuzz with construction everywhere you look. On the left we have an illustration of the situation in Yuma, where there's a lot of farm workers, some of whom come across the border every single day to work in the hot fields, and there's not enough housing there. And then on the right, we have an illustration of some housing on the Navajo Nation where they have hardly been able to build, and so there's a lot of overcrowding there. So taken all together, this is kind of the situation in Arizona, and I'm going to break it down for you. So thinking about this big picture, I started to think about, okay, you hear a lot about the housing crisis in the news, and you hear a lot about the climate crisis, but you don't often hear about them together as like thinking about the people in the same room talking about both those problems at the same time and overlapping what the solutions could be. So kind of this is a Venn diagram of what that might look like. On the left we have solutions to the housing crisis, vastly oversimplified, might be to build fast, build cheap, stick with the status quo, don't waste time trying to change things. Solutions to the climate crisis on the right here might be to build smart, build sustainably, and to change the system. And then in the middle, ideally, we'd have solutions where we're addressing both of those things at once. We're getting people housed without adding too much strain to the environment and worsening urban heat and climate change. So a little more detail on those circles. Focusing on housing might look like using materials and infrastructure that's already available, the supply chain is already set up to deliver those. Following existing design models, construction patterns, not worrying about redoing all the blueprints, and not wasting time legislating over changing major things that are locking us into the ways that we build now. Just getting the building done to get people under roofs. Solutions to focus on the climate might look like exploring new materials for better insulation and lower environmental impact, testing new designs that cast shade, conserve water. There's a really cool building on ASU's campus that the architecture of it means that it has a corridor area that's noticeably cooler than if you just walk out to the street from there. So things like that, innovations to meet local needs for affordable units near shopping, public transit. So like locating those things and looking at the local solutions that might be different in each place. And then updating the electrical grid, zoning practices, building codes to maximize efficiency and lower carbon reductions. And all of these things are already happening, but they're happening like in separate arenas. So where's the overlap? What's that green space in the middle? I talked to a lot of different experts in a lot of different sectors for this project, and the thing I heard over and over again was that multifamily housing units are the way to address housing affordability, housing shortages, and climate change at the same time. So these would be like larger apartment buildings all the way down to like a duplex. So just basically anything that's not a single family standalone home with its own yard. They are faster to build, they have a smaller footprint, and the fact that they share walls, roofs, yards, utility infrastructure, which by the way saves you a lot of tax dollars by not having to extend that out to every single subdivision. All of that reduces the impact of materials and the energy needed to get people housed. So a 2020 study found that multifamily housing unit as compared to single family homes has 15 times lower greenhouse gas emissions. Not product placement there. So the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, is a group of scientists internationally. They actually named in their most recent report urban development as a promising area for climate mitigation. So the solution is not just to not build, the solution is to build smart, according to the climate experts. And the 2022 United Nations Emission Gap Report considers minimizing unnecessary floor space per person as a promising climate solution. That's kind of obvious, but saying it again and again, it might be necessary. So, okay, we know the problem, we know the solution. Is that how we're building? So I downloaded a whole bunch of Census Bureau data, also grabbed a bunch of data from different state agencies, looked at it all together, and made this table that you can't really see very well on the left, but is in my story, so go check that out, to look at kind of what are the ways that we're building in different parts of the state. So specifically for this one example, I took American Community Survey Census Bureau data, and I looked at the change between 2011 and 2021 in the number of single-family detached homes per housing unit in larger multifamily complexes in each county. Maricopa County is doing the best in terms of building more apartment-style housing units. Makes sense because it's the most urban area of the state, but they still built 3 times as many single-family homes over that decade as units in apartment buildings. Pima County, that number was 6 times. Coconino County, where Flagstaff is, built 17 times more single-family homes than apartment units. And in Pinal County, which is a pretty rural kind of agricultural area, the Census Bureau data suggests that they only added 300 units of apartment-style units, but added 17,000 single-family homes over that decade. So no would be mostly the answer to this question. This is a comparison of types of housing in the US compared to Arizona. So Arizona is the darker bar. Arizona, in terms of percentage of its total housing stock, exceeds the national averages in only 2 categories: single-family detached homes, which are the least sustainable to build, and mobile homes, which are the least resilient to heat. So this is a pretty good, just if you want to see one slide of what the problem is, this might be it. This is Maria Rosa Vega Murillo. I hope I said that okay. She is a farm worker who lives in Somerton in Yuma County, and she gets up very early, takes a bus to the fields, works all day in the fields, and then comes home to her mobile home, but she can't go inside right away because it's usually too hot. So she keeps her AC off during the day to save on utility bills, comes back, turns it on, sits outside and waits for a while, and then eventually is able to go inside and take a cold shower and then go to sleep. So this is the situation for a lot of people in that area because there simply are not other types of housing available. This is a map that we made of the percentage of housing that is mobile homes in each different county, and you can see that it's highest in some of the hottest parts of Arizona. So Yuma County, La Paz County, you've got rates of like 35 to 55% of housing units that are mobile homes. This is on the left, Patricia Solis. She is a researcher at ASU who studies mobile home geography, and she found that 30% of heat-associated deaths occur indoors, and and a lot of them are in mobile homes, which is not, a huge percentage of our housing. So, she makes the point that we have to think about how we're providing shelter and making housing available. Okay, the other way that we are mostly providing shelter, the majority category of housing in Arizona, is this type of single-family detached home. This is Queen Creek. It's one of the places that saw the most building recently. And at the top is a headline from my colleague Brandon Loomis, who covered the announcement by Governor Hobbs in June that there would be a building moratorium for Queen Creek and Buckeye based on a study that found a 4% shortage in groundwater resources in the next 100 years in this place. That finding has been very overblown by national outlets, so I just want to make that clear that it's a 4% shortage in 100 years. We're not running out of water right now, but we do have to really think about this. So what that means in the context of this project is that we are building a lot in some of the areas where the state groundwater models and the governor have said that it's least sustainable to be building in those places. By national outlets, so I just want to make that clear. Excuse me? Okay. We have a glitch or something? Yeah, I don't know. Okay. Okay. Just to point out, both Buckeye and Queen Creek are in the top 10 of this list that I made of the places that have increased their housing units the most over the decade between 2010 and 2020, and that's out of 40 total municipalities that we looked at. This is Dorothy Deal. She's in her one-room Hogan on the Navajo Nation. She's a enrolled member of the tribe there. She has electricity but not water, and that is the situation for many thousands of homes on the Navajo Nation. The number kind of varies depending on who you ask. But and she's located right near where that star is on the Navajo Nation. That's her brother, Percy Deal, down in the bottom left corner. He's hauling water to his home. He also doesn't have running water. And part of, so he lives there by himself. His family actually, as they grew and his children became adults and had kids of their own, they needed more space. And since there's so much crowding on the Navajo Nation, there's such a housing shortage, they ended up moving to the Phoenix area, and so he now lives there by himself and drives to go visit them regularly. So this is just kind of one snapshot of the different ways that housing needs are playing out in different parts of the state. Okay, all of this is really depressing, right? Is there any good news? Yes, there's some. So Arizona, being a western, frontier state, has younger housing stock than many other places in the country. So on the East Coast, they have much older housing. They're going to have a hard time retrofitting for heat extremes and things like that. Luckily, Arizona homes are on average 12 years younger, which means that they were built with more from the get-go, with more upgraded energy efficiency, better, more sustainable building codes. So we're in less of a situation than if we were in the East of having to redo things that were not done in the best way possible in the first place. I talked to Kurt Rich, who is the president and CEO of the North American Insulation Manufacturers Association, in case you didn't know that was a thing. And he said that prior to 1980, there were no energy codes, and a lot of homes built before then have zero insulation. And so, and then since then, as the energy codes have upgraded, you see huge leaps in the quality of insulation that is required by each version of updated codes. So, and that translates directly, obviously, into reduced utility costs, lower energy use, lower energy demand, less strain on the grid. So another bright spot in all this, maybe, is that Scottsdale became the first city in Arizona to mandate green building rules in late 2022. So they were working on that for 3 years. They finally got it passed, where now developers are required to follow pretty progressive green building measures in Scottsdale. And they got some national coverage for that. Okay, so the next thing that we did for my project is I worked with Julia Cooper, who's this picture in the bottom here, as a research assistant supported by MIT. And we picked 40 Arizona municipalities across the state that seemed relevant for comparison. So that included all of the ones in Maricopa County and then some outlying ones in different parts of the state. We obtained their building codes and we read them and graded them on their sustainability measures and their adherence to the latest efficiency standards. And there's a map made by Shelby Slade that is in part of this series, where you can go and you can click on the different, it's color coded based on how green we determined each area to be, and you can click on it and read a little bit about why we gave it the score that we did. Obviously, this is like one way to do this. There's many ways to do this, but this was the approach that we took to be able to kind of quantitatively compare some of these ways that different places are building throughout the state. These are just some screenshots from the Instagram sharing of the process, that you can, just letting you know that you can look into how we assigned these scores more if you would like. It's also in that story where the map is. We gave 3 cities in Maricopa County perfect scores, where we decided, okay, based on the building codes and what we're reading in these building codes, it looks like these municipalities are doing everything they reasonably could to build in sustainable ways that are going to be good for the climate while addressing housing. And that's Scottsdale, Buckeye, and Surprise. And then we gave 10 other cities in Maricopa County scores of 4, so out of 5. And then three areas earned a low score of 1. And that was because Sun City and Sun City West are major master planned communities that have pretty outdated guidelines. And then Gila Bend is actually, it's a very small community that is actually still adhering to 2006 building codes. So there's been a lot of improvement since 2006 that is not being mandated in that area. Okay, so why is it so different across the state? The way that if you're a developer and you have like all these different rules that you have to follow, and it really varies. How is that even happening? It all comes down to there's no statewide building code in Arizona, which most states do have a statewide building code. And that means that each different individual municipality has to adopt upgrades on like a case-by-case basis. And city council meetings, so you're just like repeating the process in every single place. And what that results in is that you have very different outcomes from those processes depending on kind of your priorities, the culture in that area, the resources, the public engagement at committee meetings, things like that. Okay, what it means in terms of how we're building and the climate impacts of building is that what we found from pulling all of this data together is that what this all means in conglomerate is that some of the places that we gave the highest building scores to for climate-friendly building are actually not building very much. That could be for a variety of reasons, and I'll touch on a few of those. But as an example, Paradise Valley, Cave Creek, and Carefree each receives climate scores of 4, relatively high, but have each added fewer than 300 units between 2010 and 2020. So they're not really building at all. So the fact that they require very sustainable types of building, we might not be seeing the effect of that. On the other end of the scale, 82% of Maricopa County municipalities have not adopted the latest 2021 International Code Council standards, which means that they're building on outdated energy efficiency policies. And if you think about the fact that the average home is going to last 100 years, you're really like locking a lot of emissions use into place by being even just 3 years behind on your energy codes for a long time into the future. Phoenix, Mesa, and Gilbert were on that list, and they collectively added 78,000 housing units between 2010 and 2020. Okay, another thing we found in the course of this reporting is that sometimes municipalities have contradictory policies. So in Scottsdale, they have adopted this very progressive green building code, but then they had a actually this was before that, but same year, they had a representative from Southwest Gas, which is a natural gas provider, show up at a Scottsdale Building Advisory Board of Appeals meeting and oppose an amendment that would have required builders to wire homes to make them ready for electric appliances. That's not taking away the option for natural gas fueled appliances, but it would have like given the choice for electrical appliances. After he attended that meeting and voiced his objections based on economic concerns, which Scottsdale is one of the most affluent areas in the state, the amendment was withdrawn. And so builders, even though Scottsdale has the most aggressive green building codes, they do not require builders to make homes electric ready. And I talked to a representative from the Southwest Energy Efficiency Project about this, and she said that she felt some concern that sometimes energy efficiency is used as kind of a selling point for luxury homes, rather than making it something that we're prioritizing for people who need to be reducing their utility bills the most. Okay, another thing that I found in the course of this reporting is that sometimes environmental regulations in other places have been used as a kind of a backhanded way to limit growth entirely. So you adopt a very aggressive green building standards, and then nobody can build there, or you prevent building, or you dissuade developers from coming to your area in other ways. And so it's kind of, you can compare it to kind of historically racist exclusionary zoning practices where you are, just kind of doing backhanded things to limit who can live in certain areas. I talked to Jake Hinman, a lobbyist for the Arizona Multi-Housing Association, which advocates for multifamily development, about this, and he specifically called out Scottsdale as opposing density, which is the most sustainable way to build. So we have that kind of contradiction going on. And then we also have some evidence of greenwashing and political interference that I uncovered through the course of this project. So there were 2 bills in the last legislative session that were designed to, there are different opinions about all the different impacts that they would have, but they were designed to loosen zoning restrictions to allow for more affordable housing development, which would also be multifamily, more sustainable housing development. And they had broad bipartisan support. Zoning regulations have been one of the ways that, one of the things that have limited multifamily housing the most, in addition to protesters in the Not in My Backyard camp, the NIMBY groups. But this was at the legislature where both of these bills failed, even though they had bipartisan support. And Hinman told me that he thought it was because a lot of representatives from different cities showed up to oppose it. And then turns out that includes representatives from every single city that received top scores in our green building code analysis. So Surprise, Buckeye, Phoenix, Tucson, Prescott, all the ones that got 5s on our score then showed up to oppose rezoning to allow for multifamily development. Okay, so what does all this mean? If nearly every city in Arizona that has adopted greener building standards then blocks amendments and zoning changes that would facilitate housing development in some of the most sustainable ways. So if you add it all together, just to recap, our reporting found that the places with the most climate-friendly building policies are not doing that much building, are opposing energy policies, and this is just one example, but for example, that would reduce greenhouse gas emissions, are adopting other policies that make multifamily housing development nearly impossible, like zoning, and then and height restrictions too, which is another thing that Scottsdale adopted, and then are sending representatives to oppose new legislation designed to help. So that raises a lot of questions about how do we get into this green space and how do we get around the obstacles to getting into this green space, because we know what the green space is, but there are a variety of things that are blocking us from building in that overlapping space that would be addressing both of these crises at once. This is Representative Oscar De Los Santos on the right. He has also talked about this problem in Arizona, and he pointed to there are a lot of options. There are a lot of solutions. Some of them are political. Some of them are reforming groundwater management practices, and some of those, and supporting programs like cool roofs, cool pavements to cool down the city overall. And some of those things we're doing. There's efforts to restructure the Metro Center, which was an old mall, for affordable housing. So there's some things that are happening that I don't have time to go into right now, but there are avenues, and he pointed that out. But he also said something that stuck with me, that he said, in the wealthiest society in human history, it's nothing short of immoral to have thousands of human beings out on the streets exposed to deadly heat waves. So he's saying we have to solve the homelessness situation first. The other solutions I'll go into more later in future publications as part of my series, but kind of the take-home message is to get involved. And if you care about this issue, you can show up and have a voice and be informed, and that can change things. Since all of these things are happening at a local level, change can happen at a local level too. And then I just wanted to kind of tease, I have a few more stories forthcoming in the series, including on housing challenges, as I alluded to, in other parts of the state, and a solutions piece. So stay tuned for that, please. And then thank you so much. And there's my email if you'd like to get in touch. And I really encourage everyone to become a subscriber to their local newspaper, whatever that is.
Thank you so much, Joan. That was a great presentation. Lots of really good information. And if you haven't read her previous articles already, I encourage you to do that. We have a few questions from our online audience, but I did want to see if there are any questions for the in-person audience first, and then we'll kind of go back and forth.
Thank you. It's kind of a comment and then a question. I don't know if the mic is on. So I'm reading the book Paved Paradise right now, and it's a fascinating book, and one of the lines in there is how in this country anyway, it's not specific to Arizona, we are building more 3-car garages than we are 1-bedroom apartments in this country. And so that gets to like our values. So I guess that leads into the question, how do we change our societal values? Because it is a moral issue.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is evidence, I believe that, and I think that is evidence of the wealth divide, which is underscoring a lot of this, right? And, you know, a lot of times to try to get people to care about things like the housing crisis and the climate crisis, one of the entry points that communicators feel works best is to talk about the economics of it. Like, how is this going to save you money? How is this going to benefit you? But I think another way to, and I already mentioned one thing about like lowering taxes by not having to pay for utility infrastructure extended to all of these 3-car garages when we could just pop up another apartment building right in one of these downtown vacant lots. But I think another entry point is, do you really want to be driving around in your super fancy car just with tons of unhoused people literally dying on the street? Is that the ambiance you want? I mean, to be as callous as possible about it, like just like if you're only thinking about your own experience, is that the experience that you want to have? Wouldn't it be better if those people were housed and not dying right in front of you? That's one point. Yeah.
I'm going to take some questions from our online audience. We have kind of a question from Steve and Maya that go together. They're talking about just housing affordability. So even with multifamily housing and single-family housing, a lot of that's too expensive for people. If you kind of comment on that. And then Maya has a question about short-term rentals such as Airbnb and that having an effect on the housing crisis. So if you can talk a little bit about that housing crisis and affordability, and are there any legislators kind of tackling some of these issues, especially when we're thinking about short-term rentals?
Yeah, so I purposely steered a little bit clear of 2 different areas of reporting in this project. I didn't put a ton of focus on water because we have another reporter who does a lot on water, and I felt like that was kind of taken care of and didn't need to be redone. And then I also didn't delve too far into housing affordability because we have an amazing housing reporting team that is doing a lot on that. So I was kind of trying to find like the space in between that wasn't being covered as much. So I don't have a ton to say about housing affordability other than I agree it's a problem, and it is resulting in, these evictions where certain socioeconomic classes of people are the ones being exposed to extreme heat. And we know that extreme heat affects elderly, disabled, people with pre-existing health conditions, and those are also groups likely to be struggling to make their rent. So then we're evicting them out onto the street. That's a serious problem. Phoenix just passed a measure to allow for more ADUs, and I think that is a great solution because it's adding a whole housing unit for somebody without really increasing the footprint of growth at all. So it's like in somebody's backyard, pop up a mother-in-law unit rent it out. That would help with your own mortgage payments and also get somebody housed in a relatively inexpensive way with relatively low impact. The short-term rental thing is definitely a problem. I view that as a little bit outside the scope of this project, though, so I agree it's a problem.
And Steve also had a question specifically about an image that you showed. I'm not sure which one, but I think it was earlier in your presentation of the multi-family housing under construction. He was asking if the glued chip wall panels use formaldehyde in the glue.
That is very specific and much more specific than my reporting got to.
No problem. All right. Do we have any other questions in the in-person audience? We have a question here from Garrett. They're doing building modeling to estimate energy usage in neighborhoods in response to heat. They'd like to model temperature increases. Where can the public learn more about modeling the urban heat island effect?
There's a lot of interesting work being done in this area. Arizona State University is doing a lot. They have, I believe they have a map of urban heat islands. Differences across I couldn't tell you exactly where to find it, but if you Google Arizona State University Urban Heat Island map, you'll probably find it. Climate Central is an organization I mentioned that did a lot of modeling of like compared to a natural undeveloped desert, how much warmer are things now? Yeah, there's so much. It's like almost a overabundance of information on there's no question that the urban heat island effect is having an impact, and we're getting better and better at modeling that into like really small scales. And the other thing we know related to that is that lower income and minority neighborhoods tend to be hotter, and that is a combination of like the ways that we build and lacking trees and tree maintenance and all of those things.
And we have a question from Jeff. Why do you think single-family homes in Arizona don't have basements? It seems that this sustainable building method would save massive amounts of energy and take advantage of Earth's natural cooling capability. One builder told me it was solely due to economics. It's simply cheaper to build on a slab, and cheap wins out over energy efficiency.
Yeah, I wondered that too. I think it's we're like building these kind of homes that are just cookie cutter, like we can get them done really quickly. I think it would be great to have more basements. I'm not sure of I'm not an engineer, so there might be constraints where it's too rocky or the water table is at a certain place or something like that. I don't have a super comprehensive answer to that, but it's something that I wondered about and that I might look into more. It's a good question.
And I think those are our questions from the online audience. Any more from the in-person audience? We can do a second question.
Thanks. Are there any policymakers in Maricopa County or in Arizona who are progressive enough to say, maybe we should limit the size of the square footage of homes that we permit? Why permit a 5,000, 7,000 square foot house for one family that could house dozens of family? Are there any policymakers who we can get behind and support because they are thinking in terms of like, let's put some sensible limits on this?
Yes. Well, I think right there, you're getting into kind of a hornet's nest of, a lot of people would, never ever back down from the idea that you should have the right to pursue whatever kind of life you want to live in whatever kind of house that you can afford, and that's the American dream. And I'm not here to tell you that you can't do that. It kind of just comes back to like, when we look at the problems that we're facing all together, what is the way that we want to move forward on those? And is your insistence on a certain thing worth, are you okay with that meaning that a lot of people are going to be literally dying on the streets around you? Steve Kaiser was the state senator who introduced several those bills on affordable housing development, loosening zoning changes. He has since resigned from the legislature, citing family reasons. I know he was kind of frustrated over those bills not getting passed. Solange Whitehead was kind of the force. She's a city council member in Scottsdale. She was kind of one of the driving forces behind them adopting their green building code. And it's really not her fault that there were like other forces working against that being as meaningful of a solution as it could have been. I think her heart is in the right place and she would like to see some of these things happen. So I bet she would have a conversation with you about that. I think there's a lot of others, like Oscar de los Santos, who I ended on. He's thinking about this problem a lot. But yeah, I think when it comes to regulating things like square footage of a house, that's going to be tricky in a place that is really a draw for people because of its like freedom of ways that you can live.
I had a question about, we're talking about retrofitting some of the homes to be more energy efficient and talking about how Arizona tends to have newer homes, but what is the cost associated with making homes more energy efficient, especially older homes here in Phoenix? And are there incentives to help homeowners kind of deal with that?
Yes, sort of. I mean, there are programs. There's some incentives through the Inflation Reduction Act, which was the climate legislation passed by President Biden last summer, that support weatherization. And not only is that, so Arizona got a grant for $47 million to support weatherizing homes, which means, going in and testing where they're leaky and fixing those leaks and redoing vents and ductwork and insulation and things to help people out. And that $47,000, some of it is going directly to subsidizing those services for lower income people. And Karen Potter at the Southwest Energy Efficiency Project told me that that's going to cover those services for about 3,400 households. That's obviously not at the level of need statewide. But some of that $47,000 is going into training people on doing weatherization and making those types of services more available and seeding those kinds of businesses that are going to be able to do more of that. And so I think all of that is good and is going to make those kind of retrofits more accessible to people in the future. But yeah, there's a big need for it, and it can be a cost barrier for people. But it's worth looking into whether you might qualify for assistance programs for weatherization.
Thank you so much. I will go ahead and ask another question. If we don't have any more questions from the in-person audience, you started the program out by talking about the unhoused, and this summer was at record-breaking heat, and I'm just wondering, are there plans in place for how we're going to deal with this better next summer? Because it's only going to get hotter. And as you showed us, there's just not enough shelter space for a lot of the in-house. So I guess what are the plans? Like, how are we going to do better?
Yeah, I mean, so Dave Hondula is running the Phoenix's Office of Heat Response and Mitigation. He certainly has a lot of plans. He recently outlined like 31 of them for how we're going to deal with mostly responding to heat, and as opposed to limiting how much heat is going to get worse. Well, I guess, I don't know, it's a mix, because that includes things like cool roofs, cool pavements, a water truck, more response measures, cooling centers. So we're fortunate in this area to have a designated office that is specifically thinking about this every single day. That being said, some of those programs are taking a while to get going. Some of them, and it's a really big problem to solve, even with 31 different strategies. So it's not like, I think we're still gonna have summers like this summer and potentially worse, but we got, there's so much, I think so many more people locally and not elsewhere are paying attention to this problem now, that I think just having those conversations and having this Office of Heat Response Mitigation and having, the eyes on them to fix this, and I think all of that going to help. And I asked him specifically, like, okay, national outlets are saying that Phoenix is not livable, but people continue to move here. And he kind of said, we're going to make it livable. He thinks that we can do it. He encourages growth. So there's a lot of different people thinking about this.
And so, there's all the natural disasters that we're seeing in the news. And when we think of natural disaster, we think of like flooding, hurricanes. Is labeling extreme heat a natural disaster also going to kind of help with the response too?
Yeah, there's certainly people that are saying that it will. There's been some moves by both Mayor Gallego and Senator Gallego to label heat a national emergency, a disaster that would open up like some FEMA response funding. It is interesting that it's the most deadly natural disaster. It kills more people, but because than hurricanes or flooding or any of these things. But because I think it's not visually as you don't see the before and after of a heat wave the same way you see the before and after of a hurricane. I think it's harder to get those balls like moving in terms of response and action. I've also heard some interesting talk about would it help to name heat waves the way that we name hurricanes, because then we would it could help with like messaging to keep people safe and alert them that this is coming. It could help with, we need X billion number of dollars to respond to heat wave like Irene. It seems like the I's are always the ones that are the worst. I think those are conversations that people are having at all levels. And then also there's a push to categorize heat as a protection that workers need under OSHA.
There's actually a comment from Jeff, which echoes what you just said when you were answering the other question about Phoenix being inhabitable by 2050. But you've had all these conversations with experts and people who are doing something about it. Do you think that communities in Arizona will be able to become climate resilient and thrive in 2050? Or
define thrive.
How about climate resilient? Then we'll stay with that.
I mean, so things are going to get worse. They are. We have slowed globally how much we're increasing our emissions every year, but they are still increasing. We're not yet decreasing emissions. So we're going to need a ton of different solutions all happening at the same time to get this thing under control. In the meantime, for the next decade plus, couple decades, we will probably see worse heat, worse drought, worse flooding on average. Not necessarily like every single year is going to be worse than the last one, but this is we're talking about the whole globe, so it's a averaged prediction. But that's what all the experts are expecting. It's really depressing to think about it that way. So I recently had a heart-to-heart with another climate reporter on exactly this topic. Like, how do we keep doing this when it's really hard to just wake up and think about this and talk to people about this all day, every day, and still enjoy your life. But I think we have a lot of agency in reducing how much worse it gets. And then beyond that arc of we already set in stone that it is going to get worse for a little while longer, it doesn't have to just keep getting worse forever, and we can dial it back to more reasonable levels eventually. So yeah, I think it's gonna get worse before it gets better, and I think that we realistically want to be mentally prepared for that. But the getting better eventually has to start with doing things differently now.
I know we're almost at 7, but we have a couple small questions from a few more folks, if you're okay staying on a little bit longer. Maureen is asking about using old malls to supply housing and other needs for the homeless. Can you talk about that a little bit?
I mentioned just briefly that they are redoing the Metro Center, which is a defunct mall. To part of that is going to be housing. I think that is a great solution. I'm planning on reporting more about that in my solution story, which will be probably next month out. I think that anything we can do to take existing infrastructure and repurpose it would be great. I went to a really interesting talk at the U.S. Green Building Council meeting that they had in Arizona recently, not super recently, like last spring, where they were talking about like comparing the carbon emissions of building a whole new building from scratch in like the best way possible, the most sustainable way possible, versus taking a building that already exists and retrofitting it, like remodeling it for housing. And how do we think about those carbon impacts and over like a longer time frame? And the calculus on that is pretty complicated, but there are groups like USGBC that are having those conversations and running those models and looking at that exactly. So, but yeah, I think that whenever we can take a building that's not being used and house people there, that's great.
And then Jeff wants to know if you've read Brad Lancaster's book about rainwater harvesting. He's turned his Tucson backyard into an oasis with dozens of trees watered with gray water. So maybe you can talk a little bit about like what individuals can do, with their own backyards, and if that kind of helps with any of the heat. I know there's also the question of water, but so planting native plants. More greenery is going to help keep things cooler. Obviously, it matters how you do that. Oops. Obviously, it matters the way that you do that. Like planting a big lawn is not water efficient. It's not going to be the best cooling bang for your water buck, so to speak. But planting native trees that are going to provide some shade, that are already adapted to a dry, hot environment, that's a great option. Having some kind of like awning on your house that provides shade. Even if you don't go sit out there, it's cooling the outside of your house and probably reducing your energy use to cool your home. I haven't looked into rainwater harvesting in Arizona. I did look into it a little bit when I was reporting on water in southern Utah, and it's a really interesting conversation because at least in Utah, it's not allowed in many places because it's considered to be a public health issue. But different, it's kind of, again, it's one of these things where it's dealt with at the very local level. And so there were some areas, Moab is one of them, that has lobbied to, like, the community came together and said, no, we really want this, and we'll let's talk about how to not make it a public health issue, and then expanded the use of gray water there. And so all of these conversations, they matter, and you think that it can just be like one person that goes to a city council meeting and says, I'm super into gray water, like let's talk about gray water, and then they connect with the public health official, and then they figure out how to do it, and all of a sudden you're growing a garden that like reduces heat, has food, uses water that would otherwise just go down the drain. Thank you so much. Those are all our questions from the audience today, so I think we'll go ahead and wrap it up. That was a wonderful informational presentation, and thank you so much for taking time to answer the questions tonight. And for everyone watching at home, you should definitely subscribe to the Arizona Republic and read Joan's articles and all the other articles. They're awesome. So, all right, have a good night, everyone.
Thank you.